Podcast YouTube.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to get started in just about 2 or 3 minutes. Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. We're going to get started in just 1 minute. Good morning, students, staff members, administrators, and community members.
Thank you, everybody, for being here today and taking part in District 113's Genocide Commemoration Day.
My name is Jessica Shade, and I'm a junior at Deerfield High School.
My name is Ezra Horton. I'm a senior at Deerfield High School.
My name is Joshua Horwich, and I'm a freshman at Highland Park High School. And today we are joined by our incredible team of student leaders, seniors Lexi Cohn, Stephanie Kalish, Anna Rabb, Leah Seidman, and Ariel Weil, juniors Julie Elbaum, Samantha Feinberg, Stephen Noble, Elena Miller, Ariel Rosenberg, and Cooper Wallman, as well as our faculty sponsors, Ms. Antonakis, Mr. Brazowitz, Mr. Filer, Mrs. Linder, Mrs. Meyer, and Mrs. Studnitzer.
We would like to give a special thank you to the Deerfield High School PTO and the District 113 Foundation for supporting our work with grants to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, and the ADL for their guidance, and to our community members, school board members, and administrators for their support.
In 2015, Andrew Devegian, who was a DHS sophomore at the time, founded Genocide Commemoration Day in memory of the 100th anniversary of the Armenian Genocide, and to honor his family members who were victims and survivors. Since then, it has evolved to become not only a day to reflect on the past, but a comprehensive day of honor, education, and action about hate, mass atrocities, and genocide of all forms. We have and will continue to ask a lot of each and every one of you, and we hope that this commitment to commemorating past genocide victims and helping to stand up for current and future ones will not stop after you leave today. As Andrew always says, try and take one thing, one fact, image, name, or story, and remember it, hold on to it, and carry it with you. Then share it.
We are so fortunate to have Miss Louisa Cohen-Grief here to speak today. Ms. Grieve is speaking on behalf of Omer Kanat, Director of the Uyghur Human Rights Project. Mr. Kanat is ill and unfortunately cannot speak to us today, and we wish him a speedy recovery. Ms. Louisa Cohen-Grieve is Director of Global Advocacy for the Uyghur Human Rights Project. Previously, Ms. Grieve was Vice President for Programs and East Asia Director at the National Endowment for Democracy. She has served on the Amnesty International USA Board of Directors, the Virginia Advisory Committee, and the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights and other nonprofit boards. She's the author of several book chapters on ethnic issues and human rights in China, and has testified before Congress on China's digital censorship, forced labor, Uyghur refugees, and related issues.
We are going to drop a link in the chat for a Google form where you can type up and ask any questions for our speaker. You can also find this link under our website under History Unfolding and the homepage under Watch the Speakers. Feel free to ask questions this way throughout the entire presentation, and at the end we will ask as many questions as we have time for. Please give a warm welcome to Ms. Grieve.
Thank you so much, Joshua, Ezra, Jessica, and Lexi, and others. I appreciate being here. Omer Kanat is the executive director of the Uyghur Human Rights Project and is very grateful to be invited. Unfortunately, today he couldn't make it. My organization is a Uyghur-led organization founded in 2004 and has published over 90 reports and briefings about the increasingly horrific human rights situation of the Uyghurs in their homeland at the hands of the Chinese government. A little bit about myself. I started my career with a big interest in China because of my personal heritage. I grew up with my Chinese grandmother providing so much warmth and love in my life. And my own life, I think, reflects America and why we do events like this. My grandmother was born in 1900 in a little village in China. And when she grew up and became a doctor by a miracle, she helped with vaccinations of the indigenous peoples who were suffering tremendous discrimination from the government at the time in the 1940s. She married a Scots-Irish Illinois farm boy. And on my father's side, my grandparents fled Poland in the 1880s when it was occupied by Russia and under tremendous discrimination, especially against Jews. And that's how I get the Koan in my name. And so they escaped persecution in Europe, lucky for our family. And my grandmother was Swiss Philadelphian. So the mixture of cultures I find to be a tremendous enrichment of my life and also helps me to be committed to justice and human rights for all, knowing that everywhere in the world people can be connected both personally and through our values. So at this end, I turned that love of human rights into a career. I studied Chinese, lived in China, saw the devastation of the Cultural Revolution and the recovery, and then began work supporting Hong Kongers, Chinese, Tibetans, Uyghurs, and indeed people. I worked in 11 countries in Asia, supporting people everywhere in the world who are committed to fighting for their rights, standing up for democracy, and helping those who are discriminated against and dehumanized in their own society. And so I feel blessed to have a career like this, and I've been working with the Uyghur group, specifically for the last 3 years. So that's about me. I'm not Uyghur, but I'm, citizen of the world in that way. Now, I want to say something about Omer Kanat, who is Uyghur, the leader of our small NGO. He was invited to a Holocaust memorial event last year, the January 27th Holocaust Remembrance Day, International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I want to share a little bit about what he said. The title of his talk was China's Unprecedented Campaign to Eradicate the Faith, Identity, and Cultural Heritage of the Uyghur people. And so let me say a bit about the Uyghur people. Sometimes people ask, well, how did the Uyghurs get into China, right? How did a mainly Muslim group get to China? And of course, the question goes the other way around. How did China get into the Uyghur homeland? I will show you a map in a minute. The Uyghur homeland is in Central Asia. The Uyghur language is in the Turkic language family and not in the Sino-Tibetan, that is the Chinese Tibetan language family. So Uyghurs have a lot in common with Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Uzbeks, and then Turks, the people of Turkey, and also Azerbaijan. Uyghurs have been following Islam for over 1,000 years and have a very rich culture. Everything you would expect out of a distinct civilization. A language, you can read ancient texts from 300 and 400 years ago, and if you're a scholar, you can read them from 800, 900 years ago. Important works, in fact, of Islamic philosophy, but of all subjects: poetry, literature, music, many musical instruments that are unique to the Uyghurs, cooking, of course, and so on. So as a distinct nation of people, a nationality, the Uyghurs have been suffering under, as everyone, under the Chinese government. So thinking about the fate of the Uyghur people, this is what Omer said on another Holocaust Remembrance Day. He said, "As a Uyghur, it is extremely moving for me to take part in multi-faith remembrance of the Holocaust. And Uyghurs do join with voices of conscience around the world to say never forget and never again." He said, actually Uyghurs in the diaspora, there are tens of thousands of Uyghurs who've moved to Europe, Canada, Australia, US, and Uyghurs who were born in the Uyghur region in the homeland, which is now under China's rule in Central Asia. And reflecting on the Holocaust for a Uyghur, since the terrible oppression began 4 years ago, we understand even better than before how important it is to remember the Holocaust itself as a unique period of unique evil, and at the same time, it's tremendous resonance for themselves. When Jewish intellectuals, when everyone concerned with human rights makes the connection between what's happening to the Uyghurs and the lessons we have not learned from history, or that we cannot stop from history about the centuries of persecution suffered by Jews and others, the Armenian genocide, it's truly, we can't stop speaking out. Omer especially was noting some really striking headlines that appeared actually in 2019. So I'll just give you 2 examples, actually 3. One was a column in the Washington Post in May 2019, so almost 2 years ago. Anne Applebaum is a Pulitzer Prize winning historian of the Soviet Gulag, of the Ukrainian Red Famine caused by government persecution. And the column she wrote was, "In China, never again is happening again to the Uyghur people." And then in November of that year, the editorial page editor of the Washington Post, Fred Hyatt, came to an event where UHRP presented a report about the destruction of mosques and the imprisonment of imams in the Uyghur homeland. And his column was headed, "In China, every day is Kristallnacht." And then the final example is from Dr. Ellen Kennedy, who's executive director of World Without Genocide at the Hamlin School of Law there in the Midwest. And her piece in 2019 was entitled "High-Tech Genocides from the Jews to the Uyghurs." So I'll stop that there. I can send you a link to his remarks if you're interested. But I also want to mention one other thing, that in celebrating Jewish holidays, where there's so many Jewish groups that are standing up among Christian groups and others, Muslim groups, in solidarity with the Uyghurs to stop this ongoing genocide. This year, Hanukkah took place, started on December 10th, which is International Human Rights Day. And this prompted some Uyghurs to learn a little bit about how persecuted people, the Jewish people, developed holidays, holy days that commemorated the themes from slavery to freedom, which we know from Passover, but even on Hanukkah, it really was so eye-opening for Uyghurs to understand the miracle of Hanukkah, the persecution under the Maccabees, and how knowing that a few brave individuals standing up to a genocide from those who with military power, those with the ability to dehumanize a group, to crush their resistance, and in fact, crush ordinary people, gave Uyghurs hope. Why? Because if you take the long view, you may be in mourning for the rest of your life for your missing family members, but you recognize that other people have survived genocides, more than one, have survived exile and have survived a diaspora. And so that was very meaningful. All right, so let me give you some images. I want to share my screen. All right, hopefully that came through for you. Is that right, Josh? Ezra?
You're all good.
Great. So I want to give you some images that show the Uyghur homeland. I mentioned the map. So if you look at the colored part in the middle, which I'm calling the Uyghur region, you can see that it's in a mountainous area bordering Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, a little tiny bit of Afghanistan. This is called Xinjiang with an X on Chinese maps, but the Uyghurs don't like that term because, does anyone here speak Chinese? Can you tell me what Xinjiang means? It means new territory. So it was a conquered region. Here's just a small selection of, I hope, uplifting photos of the beautiful landscapes. It's a desert region that's famous for grapes and melons and other wonderful fruits. But here we are already at genocide, and I just wanted to let you know right away that this is not a loose term. Just in March, a month ago, a report by 50 scholars closely examined the Genocide Convention itself and found violations.
Ms. Grieve?
Yes.
I'm sorry to cut you off. There seems to be an issue with your screen sharing. It looks like a normal Zoom glitch. Could you just close it and reopen again, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
It'll take me 1 minute, share the screen, and I'm going to try this again. Were you able to see the photographs?
We missed the photographs, but we see this now.
All right, so here's the map again. The Uyghur homeland called Xinjiang, and most headlines in the media. Here are the photographs of the Uyghur homeland. And now I'm showing you the report about the Genocide Convention examination, violations under each act. And as you may know from your studies of genocide, the Genocide Convention, for the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide, 5 different acts constitute genocide. Any one of them is an act of genocide in conjunction with the intent of the genocidaire. And this report also pointed out that taken as a whole, all of the Chinese government's acts, policies and acts on the ground show clearly an intent to destroy in part or in whole an entire people, the Uyghur people. And this is what Omer Kanat put in an op-ed 2.5 years ago. It was quite clear to Uyghurs that they need to disappear as a people. And then the legal analysis comes behind, and that's often the problem, that the crime of genocide is often recognized and punished only after it's already happened. So hats off to all of you for paying attention where there's still a chance to interrupt that project before it completely succeeds. Then just last month, Omer again wrote an op-ed, again concerned that so many people who are legal scholars are still saying we need to wait for evidence. And again, to all of you, you're not waiting. So how do we get to concentration camps? This is a photograph on the ground in the Uyghur region. We have evidence actually from, this is a social media post of Chinese government officials showing how they're so-called, quote unquote, re-educating Islamic extremists. and Uyghur men. You can just see, it's just one of many pictures. I want to show you, look at the poster in the background, right? Just don't, when you see that hammer and sickle, it looks like a blast from the past, right? But this picture is from 2018. And we have tremendous continuing reportage by the international media. This is, I didn't even write where this comes from. This is as recently as August this year, even though the Chinese government has been so alarmed about the reporting about what's happening that it has really restricted access by journalists. The UN can't even get in. This is from Radio Free Asia, talking about people who are no longer in a camp, but then they're moved to basically a concentration camp for families. They're in regular apartment buildings, but they are controlled when they go in and out, monitored all the time. People are getting long-term prison sentences. This is an old number from 2017, but we're getting new numbers that this is getting worse and worse. 20 years sentences for having owned a Quran or having attended an Islamic funeral. What's happening to the children? Again, I'm giving you old information. It's been out there for 2 years that when parents are taken away en masse to these re-education camps, what happens to their children? Sometimes even if one parent is left at home, the children are taken away, or if they're left with the grandparents, the children are literally taken away from their families and put in some form of state care where they are raised speaking Chinese only and having big, it's just would be sickening for you. I wish I could show you the film, shouting in unison, China is our mother. We love our mother. We love our mother. We love our homeland, China. So this is the kind of indoctrination and making children into orphans. We have a 500,000 number that's pretty clear from Chinese government documents as an ambition. It's probably more by now. And I just want to say that the whole population, according to the Chinese government, is about 11 to 12 million. Many Uyghurs don't trust this census, but that's what the official census says. There are about 12 million Uyghurs in the Uyghur homeland. There's also prevention of births, destruction of mosques, I've mentioned before. I think it's very hard to see this, but I'll give you a second to look at this time lapse from satellite photography. So on the left, you see, trees and grave markers, and then you see it bulldozed over. It kind of looks like a sand dune once they've done the bulldozing. This is in the city of Khatan. And then on the right, you'll see a mosque with the six-sided building with a dome on top, and then down below it becomes a parking lot. Lots of loyalty displays. As I mentioned, what the children have to shout their loyalty. One of the things that they're forced to shout if they're in so-called re-education in a concentration camp, my soul was infected with a disease. I don't believe in Islam. I believe in the Communist Party. The surveillance is incredible. So Human Rights Watch was able to reverse engineer an app that's used by police to connect to an entire surveillance system with a complete file on each person, including where they live, where they've ever gone, their entire history, combined with facial recognition cameras, using artificial intelligence. So here's a very picturesque street. Obviously, everybody's displaying their loyalty or are forced to put up these flags. I don't know. But if you look at the number of surveillance cameras, I mean, people have security cameras, of course, for benign reasons, but here is just a sampling of the surveillance not on a busy commercial street. So here's information about how it's put together with QR codes, location trackers that are mandatory in all commercial vehicles, QR codes on a door so that police can come by use their own phone to scan who should live there. Then they knock on the door and find out if there's anyone there who's unauthorized. So complete control of who is where and what they do. Collecting information about who they are. Do they pray? And it ends up in databases like this. This is about a 600-page document from one district of one county that was leaked. And I'm sure the leaker is taken away, disappeared at this point. These are, each box is a whole family, who they are, what number, the sibling, what's their national ID number, where they live, whether they've ever, been in trouble with the law before or been detained, and then all their connections. For example, who did they go to school with, and so on. And this is just one, as I said, one subdistrict of one county. In those homes, one of the ways that you collect information is to send cadres into each home. It's really sick because it's called becoming family, meaning we should show our ethnic unity. Han people, Han Chinese people, and Uyghur people are family members. And to prove how close these families are, they sleep on the same bed. And of course, there's tremendous emerging reports of sexual abuse in these situations. If, for example, it's women and teenager children at home or girls at home, and then the male relatives come and stay overnight in the house. Okay, so just some random photographs for here, but what about Uyghurs abroad, right? These are the people we're able to talk to. They are also harassed by the government. Asked to spy. So there is no escape. Not only is every Uyghur racked with grief and concern and stress about their relatives, they themselves are facing direct harassment to keep quiet. Now, another issue I want to mention is forced labor. That should be familiar to anyone who's studied other genocides. Cotton picking, transferred away from their homes to either another place within the Uyghur region or somewhere else in China. And this was, again, recent, just last month, evidence that this was not only, what does the Chinese government say? It says it's poverty alleviation. But a university paper made it clear that this was also part of an intentional plan to disperse the Uyghur population. Again, this is why Uyghurs know that it's a genocidal plan. So here's a semi-familiar brand. I don't know if all of you, Huawei is a very common cell phone manufacturer, not so much in the US. It's actually under sanctions from the US, both for security concerns, but also for human rights. And they marketed surveillance systems that track ethnicity. So if you look down in the bottom description, it says outcry over a Uyghur alarm system. So there is action. UHRP is part of a big coalition that involves the AFL-CIO, our major trade unions, groups working on human trafficking, many other human rights groups, and genocide prevention groups, Jewish World Watch, and many other Jewish groups. So groups that are concerned about genocide and never again are part of this coalition because cotton is a huge issue. 84%, actually last year, I think 87% of China's cotton was grown in the Uyghur region. I mentioned it right, that it was a desert region, very good conditions for growing as long as you have water. But that means 20% of the world's cotton comes from the Uyghur region. And just a sampling of the media coverage, your face mask, your t-shirt might have been made with Uyghur forced labor. There's also action at the governmental level. Finally, I'm showing you 2021 headlines. And as I mentioned, 2018 is when Uyghurs started sounding the alarm. The US government, I think you can be pretty proud actually. If you're an American, the US government has done more than any other government, 70 sanctions. And other governments, anybody care to think how many sanctions other governments have imposed on perpetrators? Two Chinese, three actually, two Chinese officials and the police department of the Xinjiang region have been put under Magnitsky sanctions, meaning their assets are frozen and they can't travel to the EU, Canada, Australia, or the US. That's it, 3, whereas the US has done 70. So that's better, but it hasn't, it's not enough. So just some sampling of the action, banning of cotton imports, some consumer campaigns related to forced labor. I'll let you take a minute if you want to use this hashtag forced labor fashion. It allows you to get active. If you go to my organization's website, and in a minute I'll give you I'm coming to the end now to give you some sense of where you might get involved. This is the Take Action page of our website. And it says, it's showing 8 things you can do to help Uyghurs in a time of genocide. Before I leave completely, I want to show you, well, I also have something to show you that's even more close to home, that's about the psychological suffering of our own neighbors, of Uyghur Americans, who for 4 years have been unable to contact their relatives, who were told by their mother or father, don't call again. And so I can show that. It's called the Uyghur Wellness Initiative, and maybe I can get into that if there's a request to look at that. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much for speaking. We've got a couple questions. So we're going to start with the first question. In any genocide, information about the actual events on the ground is often difficult to ascertain. How and in what ways are you able to determine the reliability of the information and the sources you're receiving it from? And do you ever have any doubts about the information coming out of China, and how do you address those?
What a good question. I'll try to first list the multiple sources that have been found to be reliable. One is leaked Chinese government documents. If anyone's interested, this was covered in the media under the names the Xinjiang Papers. All right, I'm just going to make sure that you know how to spell that. That was in the New York Times and other outlets. And another one is called the China Cables. Those were a different set of leaked documents covered by 27 different media outlets, working in multiple countries, following up, verifying in their own ways. So you had a lot of verification going on. Is this a faked leaked document or is it real? And they were able to cross-check it and verify that it's very reliable. Then there's satellite imagery. I showed you a tiny sample of it. Then there's social media posted on the Chinese internet behind the Great Firewall by Chinese officials themselves, showing how they've educated officials. And I didn't even show you the iconic photograph of all the men sitting in blue uniforms. You can see their faces with barbed wire on the sides and black sort of SWAT paramilitary uniformed guards with big guns. That photo, I should try to give you a link to it. I'm kind of surprised I forgot to put it in the PowerPoint. That photo was published by Chinese government officials showing how they were implementing the policy, which was round up those who should be rounded up. So that's another Chinese government source. Of course, they've been taken down, but they've been archived. And then witnesses. Now, I told you, Uyghurs abroad were suddenly told by their family members, don't call me again. And that was universal, right? So I have dozens of Uyghur friends, heard directly from hundreds of Uyghurs who are on Twitter or who've given their testimony to journalists about, they know the date. The last time I talked with my sister, the last day I talked with my mother was May 12th, 2017. The last time I talked with my mother was August 2017. She told me that my father was going away to study, quote unquote, going away to study, and don't worry and don't call again. And then they were deleted from their chats. Usually it's a Chinese version of like WhatsApp, right? It's called WeChat. So that meant that the message went out universally to all people living under the Chinese government's control, that being in touch with their own relatives, right? Having a video call with their grandkids in Virginia or LA or Oslo or London was not allowed anymore. So that tells you that the Chinese government was punishing people for having international links. It was going to be a sign of extremism or some problem. Unbelievable, right? Crazy. And also there was an attempt to control information. The Chinese government knew that this was unacceptable, would face condemnation, and that their own citizens might wonder what's going on, right? Chinese culture and Uyghur culture have this in common. Truly every culture, but we know that cultures that are especially family-centric, to be cut off from your family is just incredible. So for sure, all Chinese people who are in a censored environment would really wonder what is going on with that. So you mentioned information. I just want to give one other point about that, which is the Chinese government has had very strong messaging to the Chinese people and to the outside world. And I would love to hear, maybe people can, I don't know if people are able to give chats, but talk in the chat. But there are two main justifications that the Chinese government is giving. One is that they're fighting extremism and terrorism. And the other is that they're conducting poverty alleviation. And I'm sure many of you all who are attending, right, if you're interested in international affairs, if you follow UN programs, international humanitarian, poverty alleviation, it's actually one of the UN goals for 2030 to eliminate poverty worldwide. And so the Chinese government is getting praise from the United Nations for making progress towards this goal. And this is how they justify forcing Uyghurs out of their homes, off their farms, out of their businesses, away from their jobs as professors, out of their teaching positions, putting them in camps to give them vocational training, and then I'm assigning them to work in factories. And so I'm really not exaggerating here. So the Chinese government's propaganda itself can provide clues as to the massive scale of how it's trying to remake Uyghur society.
Thank you very much for that answer, and thank you very much for your very impactful speech. I just want a quick note to everybody. We're only able to answer questions submitted through the Google form. You can find the link in the chat. Ms. Grieve, we have another question from a student here. How do we confront the Chinese government over their genocide of the Uyghurs without slipping into anti-Asian hatred or sentiments?
Well said. I really applaud that question. It's not easy. When you're thoughtful, you're able to do it. We're opposed to a state policy, not against the Chinese people. That's easy enough to say if you're thoughtful about it. It's easy for, what about how people are hearing it, like Chinese Americans? Let's start with people in China. Some people are able to jump the Great Firewall censorship and see commentary internationally. For most people, what you would see about the condemnation of the Chinese government's atrocity crimes, they'll see filtered through Chinese media. And what do Chinese media say? It's an anti-China plot. It's racist. Look how the American government is so racist with police brutality against African Americans. Recent shooting and rise in hate crimes against Asian Americans. Look how the U.S. government the U.S. is an incredibly racist society, and so when Americans or the U.S. government, from President Biden to Nancy Pelosi to senators to Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, if they criticize China, they're just trying to deflect attention from their own human rights crimes, and that is very effective, actually. It's very natural to be concerned and to worry about hatred directed against yourself. Some of this flows over for Chinese Americans who are consuming a lot of media that's coming from Chinese state-controlled media. It's the best information available in Chinese. Taiwan is a free country, produces news in Chinese, but it's less. And especially for people who immigrated recently from China, not like my grandmother who immigrated in 1949, there's just a habit of keeping up with current news, and it'll be filtered through the Chinese governments. So I believe that it is incumbent upon anyone who wants to condemn the government to always use the word government and never say the word China, because it's easy to say, well, in fact, the Chinese government constantly says we are China and represent themselves. And in fact, they're oppressing all Chinese people as well as Tibetans and Uyghurs. So that's the key point, is to put in the word government or authorities anywhere. And I would criticize anyone who wants to stand up. And then CCP. So if you're looking at social media and there's commentary from ordinary people or politicians, if they say CCP, what they mean is Chinese Communist Party. And so that's the best you can do, is to make it quite clear that not holding Chinese people responsible, because they themselves are facing censorship, surveillance, punishment if they stand up to criticize the government. And then they've been subject to tremendous shaping of perceptions by the controlled media.
How has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the Uyghur genocide?
That part is much less known. My organization issued a report in February last year, February 26, 2020, responding to a short videos that had been posted on Chinese chat, basically the Chinese version of TikTok. And they were posted by, it seems like they were posted by local officials showing, we had 3 of them that were particularly meaningful, where somebody was on the streetscape completely empty because of lockdown, right? China had a lockdown, very strict lockdown early on, where people's doors were chained shut from the outside, right? Whole apartment buildings and individual apartments, or if you had a ground level apartment. So what we're talking about is 3 scenes that are in the Uyghur region, somebody coming outside and talking in Uyghur. So we know they're not Chinese, they're Uyghur person, or, you know, you can, one was an older man who wears the traditional Uyghur cap, which is called a dopa. This is mine. A Chinese person would never wear that. So we knew that they were Uyghurs talking, and they were saying, my family is starving. My family is starving. What was that? That was when the government suddenly imposed a lockdown order with no warning. Nobody could go out and get food, and food was not delivered to them. So that's one really horrifying thing. Everybody's heart broke. And then also there's a concern that there was evidence, again, posted by Chinese government social media accounts, celebrating poverty alleviation and how these Uyghur workers were going off to work in factories, you know, maybe 1,000 kilometers or 2,000 kilometers away. They were wearing masks. You could tell, therefore, that it was current video. It wasn't from 2 or 3 years ago. And they were being moved around at a time when the entire country was on lockdown. So it seemed that Uyghur lives were expendable. That's about all the clues that we have. We don't have statistics about deaths that are reliable.
Thank you for that. Another question: what companies, brands, etc., are participating in the perpetration of forced labor, and how can we identify these brands and stop supporting them?
Thank you so much. I would ask people to, more important than not supporting the brands is actually contacting them. So you'll see a link in a minute that in this case, it's not clicktivism, right? Where you just say, oh, it's internet activism. The brands need to hear from people. If you have a lot of energy and you literally call the comment line, or, you know, when you buy anything online, they're bombarding you with, what are those things called? Customer satisfaction surveys that, or maybe it's by text. I don't know how people get them. Or maybe you all are smarter than me, and you find a way not to give them your contact information. But if you buy online and you get these things, write back in the comment, I would like to know what you're doing to make sure that you're not profiting from Uyghur forced labor in the Xinjiang region. Send. That's much more important than not buying the products. So there have been very serious think tank reports. One of the most striking is called Uyghurs for Sale. So, you know, you can, that I'll just let you Google. That was already, again, a year ago by friends of ours in Australia who did that report. And then there's a full list at a link I will give you on just mostly the clothing brands with all that cotton, right? The whole global supply chain. 1 in 5 garments by necessity must have Xinjiang cotton because that is 20% of the world's supply. But also other industries, car parts, electronics, and so on. So there's no way you could actually boycott to exert an economic cost because it's just too many products. And so what's most important is shareholder action, legislation that's coming up. I can mention it in the Congress because that's another phone call that people can make. Jessica, would you like me to mention what that legislation is? Okay, so what you can do, rather than trying to boycott, although that's also a great moral stance, but to make a big difference, there's a bill called the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. And I will give you the numbers. Now, I want to praise in Illinois, Senator Duckworth. She recently co-sponsored this bill. And you can see her name there. If you go to congress.gov and then you put in the search box the number of the bill, Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act is S65. You'll see that she signed, but Dick Durbin is not a co-sponsor of the bill yet. So, you know how to, as civically aware people, you know how to contact your member of Congress. It doesn't have to be a long essay. You simply say, I'm a constituent. I want you to co-sponsor this bill, which would create a presumption that all imports to the US from the Uyghur region, from Xinjiang, are at such high risk of forced labor that we're going to stop it at the border, and a company would have to actually, the burden of proof is on the importer to show that it's not made with Uyghur forced labor. And this is really a pretty radical. The companies don't like it. The US Chamber of Commerce doesn't like it because in principle, the government can't stop your goods from coming in the border unless they have evidence, right? There's a tip off or they've done research, and there's no way, the volume of trade is so great. There's no way our officials in the Customs and Border Protection can do all that research. So for the most part, companies self-police, and then there's a tip off before anything happens. And they don't like the idea that there will be a blanket prohibition and the burden of proof is on the company. So it's a really important bill. It was introduced already a year ago, March 11th, 2020, didn't pass in the last Congress. Now we have a new Congress. We have the same party in the Senate, the House, and the White House. Nancy Pelosi is on the record supporting it in the House, and President Biden has been on the record condemning the genocide. So our hope is that with all your help and with Dick Durbin signing on as a co-sponsor after this day, it's one thing you can do to help take action against a current genocide.
Thank you so much for your answer on that. That's really, it's really informative for people looking to take action. It's currently Ramadan, and how are Uyghurs within China able to practice their religion given the restrictions?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've all by now, if you've been paying attention, thank you so much for your attention the last 45 minutes, you can guess. Right. People have been sent to a camp for having a Quran in their house, for praying at a funeral, retrospective punishment, and collective punishment. So a friend of ours was just recently learned indirectly, somehow news got out outside of this tight information cordon, that her sister received a 7-year sentence for having had a Quran in her house, and then a longer sentence, I can't remember if it was 10 years, for having attended a funeral at which prayers were said, a religious funeral, about her father's own funeral about 10 years ago. So that tells you that the practice of religion is banned. So I'll tell you one story about, and actually ban on, for example, practicing Ramadan has been in place for many years. So this story was told to me about 8 or 9 years ago. If you go on the street, let's say in the capital city of Urumqi, you will see that police officers are driving in the streets looking up at all the apartment buildings. What are they looking for at 4 in the morning? They're looking to see if there are lights on. And any lights that are on, please go in the building, go up and knock on the door. Why? They're looking to see if people are having their breakfast before it's time to start fasting from sunrise to sunset. So people learned if they were going to try to fast or simply were up early in the morning for another reason, you can't turn the light on or you get a visit from the police. That is the level of surveillance that Uyghurs were under 8 or 9 years ago before this 2017 beginning of the current genocide.
Thank you for that. Do you think that the reason that many nations aren't speaking up is due to the trade relations with China?
Yes. Actually, it's a combination of 3 things. Well, 4. I mean, there's many mutually reinforcing factors. First, for a long time, many policymakers and academics believed that with greater international interaction, China would just continue to open up more and more, become more liberalized, and move away from Mao Zedong, Stalin-style repression. That was true for a little while, that for the most part, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Things became freer for ordinary people. It became freer for Uyghurs. The golden period in my friend's lifetime is the 1980s and a little bit of the 1990s, but that's no longer true. And many policymakers have failed to change their mindset. Second, there is a lot of money to be made sourcing goods in China, and to complicate that hurts the bottom line. Many companies have something to be made in the China market. They're trying to sell their goods to Chinese consumers, and they're very afraid of Chinese government retaliation against their brands, right? Because it's so arbitrary, you can easily have your brand punished. And I will tell you, for those, it's almost incredible. There is right now a boycott in China of H&M, the clothing store, because of the Uyghur genocide. Why? Because H&M put up a statement in a back page of the website. Who reads that, right? It's not an ad. It's not out there in the stores. It's just on the corporate website saying, we are very concerned about reports of forced labor, in particularly in cotton in Xinjiang. And that was posted about, let's see, many months ago. And suddenly in March, the Chinese government manufactured online outrage that H&M was insulting Xinjiang cotton and the Chinese people, and was proud Chinese people would never shop at H&M because it was insulting the Chinese people. So that kind of retaliation against a brand, a foreign brand, which looking for the Chinese market for its profits, is another disincentive. And then the 4th thing I want to mention is diplomatic pressure. So for many governments looking for foreign investment, not the trade, but the investment, and that would include China's neighbors in Southeast Asia. You could think of Malaysia, Indonesia, Pakistan, even and Central Asian countries for sure, that are looking for the kind of money that the Chinese state-owned industries and even private industries have to invest in infrastructure, in manufacturing, in energy. Why would you put that at risk? And the Chinese government has a huge diplomatic pressure to silence the UN human rights bodies as well.
Thank you. We're going to just cover 1 or 2 more questions. Starting with, are there any examples of underground movements or things being done to rebel against or sabotage those involved in perpetrating the Uyghur genocide?
Yes, thank you. Certainly one of the sources of hope, and again, the story of the Maccabees, for example, in the history of Jews coping with genocidal oppression, you would think, where does the resistance come from? All the people over the last 30 years, let's say, who are Uyghur, living in China, who, although they don't like to say that, right, living in their homeland under the administration of the Chinese government, who wrote poetry, who studied Uyghur history, who wrote textbooks in Uyghur to keep the language alive, right, in a country where, right, 90% of the population is Chinese and so on. It's the language of business. But if you want to keep Uyghur language alive, just cultural promotion now is being punished. So a good friend of ours, Akita Palat, is a young woman who has been studying here in the United States. Her mother is a cultural anthropologist and was taken away. She hasn't seen her mother since December 2017. No news of where she is. So even the most normal expressions of identity, academic activities, cultural activities that are not without political lyrics, just I love my homeland, all of that is now being punished. So there was a kind of a resistance, which is taking pride in your culture and not letting it disappear, was there and is completely crushed now. So truly, truly, the Uyghurs rely on the outside world. They're under 24/7 surveillance. The slightest bit of criticism or resistance or saying no, and that applies to Chinese people too. A Chinese official, there are Chinese officials in prison right now because they refuse to carry out the orders. So truly it depends on international attention like we're getting here today.
Thank you so much, Ms. Louisa Cohn-Grieve, for taking the time to speak with us today. I know that I can say that this was really informative and I really appreciated it. We're so grateful to have the opportunity to hear from you. We want to encourage everybody listening, please take action. Please reach out to Senator Durbin and your representative to ask them to take action on this legislation, which we will put in the chat to help fight the Uyghur genocide. We hope you all join us in the movement to truly work towards the goal of never again through education about the Holocaust and other genocides and mass atrocities.
We hope that all of you who have listened also have the chance to hear our other speakers. We encourage you to go to our website at historyunfolding.org to see the other resources we've developed for you. In the past months, many of you had the opportunity to engage in our own variation of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum's History Unfolded project, this time with a focus on hate in the US and in the unfolding Uyghur genocide. You will find that research under our projects page.
In addition, please view the photographs and read the stories of various genocide survivors, victims, and rescuers with connections to District 113, an exhibit we created based on Luigi Toscano's traveling exhibit, Lest We Forget. We also have a Take Action page with simple actions you can take to stop the spread of hate in the US, to fight against the ongoing genocide of the Uyghur people, and to learn techniques for bystander intervention. In recent years, we lobbied to encourage the passage of the historic Ali Wiesel Genocide and Atrocities Prevention Act. Today, from Ms. Grieve, you heard an additional way to have an impact by sharing your voice with Senator Durbin to encourage him to join Senator Duckworth in co-sponsoring this critical piece of legislation.
Most importantly, don't forget the stories you heard today and the millions of stories of other genocide and mass atrocity victims, and let those guide you in being an upstander against hate and injustice. Thank you again to Ms. Grieve and to all of you for attending. As the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum reminds us, what you do matters. Thank you.